Hey everybody, so today we're going to take a look at the global transport in Max and also take a look at the Bach package, just a very, very small, brief introduction to Bach, which is an enormous extension of Max. The global transport is really nice for musicians and for folks who think in musical time, think in beats per minute, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, because Max in its default mode deals with time in milliseconds, which can be a little bit not intuitive if you're working with music, if you're thinking about musical phrasing and timing. So transport really solves that issue for us. The global transport is accessible from the transport object. Also, there's a control for it here in the lower right-hand corner of the window. We turn it on with the toggle. We get its status with a button. We set its tempo with a tempo attribute. Default is 120. And when we turn it on, notice that it goes on down here. Now we can do this. Metro quarter note. And now this metro is going to bang at quarter notes at 120 beats per minute. And so, clearly, if you understand what this means, if you have a musical background, this is going to be very useful, because if you build your patch around these note value divisions, then changing the tempo is going to change the speed at which all of your objects are firing, all of your delays are working, all of your make notes are working. Everything is going to be able to be slowed down or sped up together. And you can imagine how hard that would be working with milliseconds. So I can have a quarter note, I can have an eighth note triplet, start those together. Now I've got quarter notes against eighth note triplets. We can hear those. Case ladder to a make note, some velocity, and then some duration. These are quarter notes, so we can make them a quarter note long. So instead of putting in a certain number of milliseconds for the note duration here, we're putting in quarter note. And you always need a make note before a note out, because the metro here is creating the beginning of a note, the pressing down of a key on the keyboard. But there's no point at which the key is released. There's no note off. So that's what the make note creates. A quarter note after a note on is created, make note creates a note off, as if the key has been lifted from the keyboard. So this is really important to have before the note out. Otherwise, theoretically, even if your notes fade out and you don't hear them anymore, the keys are still being held down, and this can cause problems with polyphony. This can cause problems all over the place. So you just, you don't want stuck notes. You want your notes to have an end, and that's what make note does. Note out and MIDI info. Bang MIDI info to generate a U menu of all of the MIDI devices. And we'll choose our from Max 1. And then if we're dealing with a MIDI device, here I have Arturia's great emulation of the classic Casio keyboard. Go to your audio MIDI settings and make sure that from Max 1 is selected as an input. And it doesn't matter, if your computer, sometimes on Windows, this won't be from Max 1. It'll be something else. It's just that the synthesizer and the note out need to match so that you will hear them. And there's my CZ. sounding. Etc. So you can start building quite musical structures with this. And here what I did is I shortened my duration of my notes to a 16th note triplet, even though the note is being triggered every 8th note triplet. So it's a staccato. This is a way of creating a staccato note. The note off is falling halfway between the previous note on and the next note on. So it's a note that's only occupying half the duration of its slot, if you will. And the reason why I bring this up at all is, one, it's useful and interesting, but also as soon as we start working with Bach, we're going to be working with tempo, because Bach is basically a notation system and composition system that functions using musical time. So let's... And for those of you who are still a little hesitant about using subpatchers, like, this was a totally safe encapsulation. Why? What's coming out of this middle outlet of the U menu is the symbol from Max 1, and a symbol passes very happily through the inlet into the subpatcher and hits the note out, setting it to whatever we set it to. So this will be a completely functional encapsulation. Now I probably will have to send the message again. Like if I were to go in here now and just start this, yeah, it's not playing the correct synthesizer. I do have to send the information again, but once I do, I've got instant fill of glass. And note that the K sliders didn't save either. If I wanted them to save, that would be a case where I would need a preset. That preset would have to be inside the encapsulation, and I could just save that. And then if I really wanted to be safe, I could do a load mess 1, and this will load that preset. And load mess 1, just note, is exactly the same as load bang to a message of 1. Load mess means load message. So it's taking this structure and just combining it into a single object. Just one less message box to make one less patch cord to draw. Let's look at Bach. So Bach is a package, so you need to search for it in the package manager. And if you haven't already installed it, you'll need to install it here. And one thing to note about packages, and I'm sure you've already noticed this, a lot of the documentation of packages isn't in the help files. It's in the package. You have to launch the package, and the most of the help for the Bach package is here. There's hundreds of Bach objects. It's an enormous extension of Max. A bunch of tutorials and extensive documentation. And here's like the section on notation in itself is probably runs to 100 pages. And when we're just going to scratch the surface of that. Another thing to know about Bach is that it has an entire language within it. So Bach is this enormous extension to Max, and then Bell is an enormous extension of Bach in a typed-in scripting language for evaluation. So it's just big. We're just going to look at one, maybe two, maybe three Bach objects, but mostly one, which is bach.score. This is your notation inside of Max. This can be as long as you want. This can have multiple stabs. This can be in any time signature, any tempo, any key. It's an entirely flexible music notation system within Max, and it's not limited to traditional notation. It in fact excels at any kind of graphic notation, extended technique notation. That's really what it's best at, but we're going to look at it for standard notation. The first thing we want to do is to get our bach.score synced up with our transport. And to do that, we take the middle outlet, the tempo outlet of transport, and when we bang it, we see that it reports our current tempo of 120. And we want to send that in a particular format to the bach.score with the message add tempo, square bracket, $1, close square bracket. You'll see this a lot in Bach, these square brackets. They're not used in regular Max. Bach uses them for its special type of lists that it uses internally, and in this case we just need to do it in this format. And then when we bang the transport, we see that bach.score is set to quarter note equals 120 beats per minute. So that's great, and in order to hear a bach.score, you need a Bach.easy MIDI play, and you connect that to the next to the last outlet, the play out of the Bach.score, and into the right inlet you connect your MIDI source. And then again, anytime you make a connection like this, you need to resend the information. So the fact that this was selected doesn't matter. It hasn't been sent yet, so you need to reselect it, and now it's been sent. And so now we're ready to play, and we're ready to enter some notation. So the basic notation entry mode of bach.score is quite straightforward. You start out with a empty measure with a whole note rest in it, and you can convert a rest to a note or vice versa anytime just by command clicking. So you see now my rest became a whole note. If I want to turn it back to a rest, command click it, and now it's a rest again. Command click it, now it's a note again. And once it's a note, I can drag around its pitch, and I can divide it. And I divide it again by holding the command key and then choosing a number of how many divisions I want. So if I want this whole note to be divided into 4 quarter notes, I hit command 4, and now it's 4 quarter notes. And again, command click will turn any of these back into a rest. And then select any of these notes and say, okay, I want to divide that into eighth notes. So I'd hit command 2, which gives me 2 eighth notes. But this one I want to be triplets, so that's command 3. And now I've got, some music notation, and grab any individually and change the pitch. And then to play back, we need, I'll make a loop, so I'll do show loop 1, use loop 1, and loop all. This is show loop will become true, will be set to 1, use loop will be set to 1, and how much of will we loop? We'll loop all. So just be mindful of the spaces in there, and this will graphically show you the portion that's looped. We can now send the play message and the stop message to play this little piece of music. with the fabulous Casio horns. So that's a start, and command click to create a new measure. If we want to include that measure in the loop, we can either drag the loop handle out or just click this message again to get the whole loop. Command click to turn it into a note, divide it any way we want, divide it in half, and then choose this one and divide this one in 6, or what would probably be a little bit better, Command Z works, is to divide it in 2 and then divide those into 3, because that's really what it is. Two triplet groups, 2 eighth note triplet groups. And what else can we do in here? We can change notes by octave by selecting the note or notes that we want to change and holding down the shift key while hitting the down arrow to drop it by an octave, or the up arrow to raise it by an octave. Create ties by selecting the first note that you want to tie and hitting Command T. That will tie the notes. You can make chords by hitting, let's make a new measure here, and turn that into a note, make some quarter notes, and I'll set these at different pitches. Select them all, and Command Shift Y builds them into a chord. And then, of course, I could divide that chord and Command click this back into a rest, etc. And if I have something selected and I want to move around, I can use the Command arrow keys to move my selection around. So it's a pretty versatile, pretty quick way of editing notation. Bach.score is saved into a preset. So this brilliant melody can be saved into preset number 1, and I can recall that with a click. The other editing mode is a little bit better at allowing you to enter sequences of notes. And you enter that mode, it's called linear editing, by control clicking. First I'm going to create a new measure, Command click, control clicking in the white space. So I control click, and now you can see the cursor has changed to brown. Now I can edit notes by name. So first I pick a note duration. The 8th note is 4. And so a 16th note is 3, a 32nd note is 2. And going the other way, if the 8th note is 4, quarter note is 5, half note is 6. So it's laying out the divisions on the numeric keyboard. So I hit 4, and that gives me an 8th note. And it gave it at an arbitrary pitch. So I can use my arrow key to go back, and I can change the pitch. I'll say I want this to be a F. And now I can just type in the names of the next notes. I want B, D, F, A, B. And those notes are just entered in. And at any point I can change my durations again. Let's say I want some 16th notes in there. I hit 3 to change me over to 16th notes and change the pitch of that note. Let's say it's going to be F, G, A, B. G, F, G, A, B. And then I've got my sequence entered very, very quickly. You can dot notes with period, tie notes with T, add notes to a chord with N, change to a rest with R, change anything to a rest by hitting R, and that just becomes a rest. And there's also a triplet mode that you get into by hitting Option 3, and then you'll be entering triplets. So that's linear editing, and it's indicated when you have the brown marker. Save that, and then I can switch back and forth between the two melodies. And because I have set the tempo here from the transport, I know that this is going to synchronize with anything that I'm using time values with here.